Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph will begin Yud Aleph Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Ikadamri. So we discussed previously, the Machlekes Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda, whether Rav Meir says that one aide says the event took place on the 2nd hour, and the other aide said it took place on the 3rd hour. The aidus is accepted, but if it would be a larger discrepancy, it would not be accepted. Rav Yehuda says, even one says the 3rd and one says the 5th, it's also accepted. So we said previously that Abaye said that don't think that the discrepancies that we accept are an hour, people make a mistake with an hour or 2 hours. No, according to Rav Meir, he said that a person doesn't make a mistake. The incident took place when one said the 2nd hour and the other said the 3rd. The incident took place on when the 2nd hour was finishing and the 3rd hour was beginning. So one referred to it as the 2nd, he meant the end of the 2nd. The other one said 3rd, he meant the beginning of the 3rd. And according to Rav Yehuda, a person makes a mistake with a half hour, and the incident took place at 4.5 hours. And the one that had said 3rd hour, it's the end of the 3rd hour. The one that said the 5th hour, it's the beginning of the 5th hour. Ikadamri, a different version. Not that according to a Rav Meir that a person doesn't make a mistake at all. No, he makes a mistake with a mashu, a very slight variance. And according to Rav Yehuda, a person would make a mistake with an hour and a little bit. So Abaye explains. A person makes a mistake with a mashu, the incident occurred the incident took place either at the end of the 2nd hour or the beginning of the 3rd. And one of them made a mistake with a mashu. So it occurred either at the end of the 2nd hour, and therefore the one that said the 3rd hour, he meant the beginning of the 3rd hour, but he made a mistake with a mashu, a very slight variance. It was not the beginning of the 3rd hour, it was the end of the 2nd hour. Or the event occurred at the beginning of the 3rd hour, and the person who said, the aide that said it occurred at the end of the 2nd hour. The 2nd hour, he meant the end of the 2nd hour, and he made a mistake with the mashu. So v'chan minay toyim mashu, l'div Rav Yehuda adam toyashom mashu. And according to Rav Yehuda, a person makes a mistake with an hour and a mashu. Ma'isa ki hava oy b'sayv shalosh oy b'tchilas chomesh. So the ma'isa happened either at the end of the 3rd hour, and therefore the one that said the 5th hour, he made a mistake with an hour and a mashu. When he said the 5th hour, he meant the beginning of the 5th hour, which is an hour and a bit apart from the end of the 3rd hour. So the ma'isa was either b'sayv shalosh or b'tchilas chomesh, or it happened at the very beginning of the 5th hour, and the one that said the 5th hour was correct, was precise. The one that said the 3rd hour, he meant the end of the 3rd hour, and he made a mistake with an hour and a bit, because it occurred at the beginning of the 5th hour. One of them made a mistake with an hour and a little bit. So that's the way Abaye explained the machlekes. Also, Rav Huna Breda Rav Yehuda, he went and Amlishmaisa Kami the Rava, and he said over Abaye's pshat in the presence of Rava. Rava said, "How could this be? Uma ilu daikina bahani sadik." If we would examine these witnesses, and the one that said the 3rd, perhaps he meant the beginning of the 3rd. And if we would examine him, he would have said, perhaps he would have said, no, I didn't mean the end of the 3rd, I meant the beginning of the 3rd hour. And if we would examine the other witness who said the 5th hour, perhaps he would say, no, I didn't mean the beginning of the 5th hour, I meant the end of the 5th hour. So then there is a discrepancy, which is more than the margin, the acceptable margin of error, and then the aidus would not be acceptable. And that means they would be contradicting themselves, and we wouldn't be able to kill the person. Now, if we would examine that, perhaps that would be the outcome. So therefore, how can you say, well, we'll assume that the one that said the 3rd hour meant the end of the 3rd hour, and the one that said the 5th hour, he meant the beginning of the 5th hour. How can we assume that? And based on that, and based on that, which is a doubt, which is suffix, we're going to go ahead and kill the accused person? How could that be? be. The Torah says that you have to make an effort to search for ways to exonerate the accused. We have to look for a way to find the way that he should not be killed. So how can we make an assumption and based on the assumption accept the edus and therefore kill the person? So therefore Rava rejects Abaye's pshat. El Amar Rava says L'divrei Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir, Adam Toyesh Teisho is Chaser Masha. According to Rabbi Meir, a person could make a mistake up to 2 hours. 2 hours, less a little bit. And within that period of time, we say, well, it's if the two witnesses are saying something different that's within that 2 hours less a mashu period of time, we say that's an acceptable margin of error. They're not contradicting themselves, and each one made a slight mistake. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, we say that people would make a mistake up to 3 hours, 3 hours less a little bit. Now Rava explains. According to Rabbi Meir, a person makes a mistake 2 hours less a mashu. So therefore, we interpret it as follows. One said the second hour, the other one said the third hour. Therefore, we say it's as follows. Maisa ki hava, we assume that the Maisa took place. Oy b'tchilish time, oy b'soy sholosh. It could have occurred either at the beginning of the second hour or the end of the third hour. And if it occurred anywhere within that period of time, the edus is still acceptable. Meaning, we make the assumption that in the broadest sense, and if we make the assumption that the event could have occurred in when it said the third hour, or it said the second hour, it means the beginning and the second, the end of the third, meaning that there is the greatest lapse of time between these 2 hours. One, the second hour means the beginning of the second, the third means the end of the third. And if the edus is still valid, if it's not contradictory, if we make this assumption, and they make this assumption, and then we say that it occurred at the furthest, furthest possible discrepancy, and the edus is still not deemed to be contradictory, only then do we accept it. So therefore, the Maisa could have taken place once at the second hour. That could mean the beginning of the second hour. The once to the third could be the end. And one of the Adam is making a mistake, perhaps, with 2 hours less a mash. L'divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So that's according to Rameir. And therefore, according to Rameir, the edus will be valid in any event, because even if we say that the one that said the second hour meant the beginning of the second hour, the one that said the end of the third hour, they're still not contradictory. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, again, we make the assumptions that when they said what they said were the furthest from each other. Once it said it's the third hour, we would have to assume the third hour meant the beginning of the third hour. The one that said the fifth hour meant the end of the fifth hour. And one is making a mistake with 3 hours less than mashu, but that's still acceptable because a person would make that kind of a mistake. The Adam would make that kind of mistake. Meaning, what we do is we take the largest discrepancy, the largest spread between what the Adam could have meant. And if the edus is still considered to be not contradictory, meaning that Adam, we say that they could have made that mistake, and therefore they're not contradicting each other. If we take the largest discrepancy and the edus that they say still could fall within that time period, then it's acceptable. But if we take the assumption, if we make the assumption that it's on the furthest possible discrepancy between the largest spread between the two, and it's more than the acceptable margin of error, then it's not acceptable. So therefore, according to Rameir, we say when he said the second means the beginning of the second, the third means the end of the third, and we make that assumption to give the largest discrepancy between what the two Adam are saying. If it falls within the acceptable margin of error, then we accept it. And now in this case, it does, because we say that according to Rameir, Adam Toya Shtei shos chosar mashu. But if it would be more than that, if one would say, according to Rameir, the third and the fifth, where we would have to assume the third means the beginning of the third and the fifth means the end of the fifth, where it's a 3-hour discrepancy or 3-hour less than mashu discrepancy, we would not accept it. Rabbi Yehuda said even that kind of a mistake, that is acceptable, that is within the boundaries of an acceptable margin of error. So even 3 and 5 would accept it, but not more than that. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah Sanhedrin, the Eidim would be examined with 7 standard questions. These ones are called chakiras. What are these questions? Be'ezah Shavua, which 7-year cycle in the Yovel cycle, there's 7 years, 7 Shemitas, and which comprise of 49 years for the Yovel cycle. Which one of these 7-year periods was it in? Be'ezah Shana, which year within the 7 year of the Shemitah cycle, which year of the Shemitah cycle was it in? Be'ezah Chodesh, in which month of the year? Bekam b'chodesh, which day of the year? Be'ezah Yom, which day of the week? Be'ezah Shon, which hour? Be'ezah Makam, and which place was it in? Now, as we'll see shortly in the Gemara, these standard questions were posed to the witnesses to determine, to pinpoint the exact time and place that the event occurred, so that we can determine later on, if Eidim come and say, well, how can you have testified that at this time and place such and such happened, that so-and-so did such and such, you were with us at that time and place somewhere else. So those will make them into Eidim Zaymim. Now it's necessary to uphold an Eidus, it has to be an Eidus Sha'ata Yochel Azima, that it could be brought to a case of whether Eidim Zaymim. So you have to pinpoint the exact time and place that the event occurred, so that to enable other Eidim to say, how could you have said that this happened? You must be lying. You were with us at this time and place somewhere else, and therefore render them Eidim Zaymim. So these are the chakiras. With Tanan we learned in the Mishnah. So these are the chakiras. Ma ben chakiras lebedikas. There are other type of questions, which are bedikas, which we are avoiding them, and it's not pinpointing the exact time and place. It's other type of questions about the event. For instance, what weapon was used, or what clothing did the accused wear or the victim wore. Those they ask, and there's no set amount of these types of questions. They all ask all these types of questions to determine if the Eidim contradict each other. So what's the difference between these Chakiras questions and Bedikas questions? So Mor says, if the witness says, I don't know, so Chakiras, in the Chakiras questions, if one of the Eidim says, I don't know, then the Eidus is bottled. It's not accepted. Bedika is, but in the Bedikas questions, both with the witnesses says we don't know, Eidus and Kayemis. The Eidus is still upheld. We're still Mekayim the Eidus. And the Gemara asks, Maishno, what's the difference? Chakiras and Maishno Bedikas. What's the difference between the two? What's the difference that in the Chakiras, if even one says I don't know, the Eidus Betela, and in the Bedikas, even if both say I don't know, it's accepted. Vamrinan Chakiras, in the case of the Chakiras, Amar Echem Eni Yedei Eidus Betela. Why? Dahavila Eidus Shiata Yochel Azima. Because by saying I don't know, you render the Eidus Shiata Yochel Azima. You can't be Mazim. Bedikas Eidus Shata Yochel Zima, but by Bedikas it is Eidus Shata Yochel Zima. Meaning, the purpose of the Chakiras is to pinpoint the exact time and place that they testified the event occurred. Now, if one of the Eidim say, even one says, well, I don't know, then you haven't pinpointed the exact time and place. So it becomes an Eidus Shiata Yochel Zima. Then you are not enabling other witnesses to come and say, how could you have testified that this took place, that this happened at such and such a time and place? You were with us at that day and that time and that place somewhere else. Well, if they haven't identified the exact time and place that the event occurred, you make it Eidus Shiata Yochel Zima. And now we darshan that Eidus is only acceptable if they can be made to be Eidim Zaymim. As far as the Bedikas are concerned, the Bedikas have nothing to do with pinpointing the time and place. So therefore, even if they say, I don't know, well, they can still be made into, Eidim can still make them into Eidim Zaymim, and by saying, well, if you don't know what clothing the accused wore, but nevertheless, you were with us at that time and place on that date, and you couldn't have seen the event at all. You can still make it into Eidim Zaymim. Now Rashi points out that, well, even if they don't know the exact hour that the event took place, if the other Eidim come and say, how could you have testified that such and such took place at that time and place? You were with us the entire day. Now it's true in such a case they could be made into Eidim Zaymim. As theoretically, even if they say, I don't know, by one of the times, let's say the time, or even the day of the week, perhaps, if they said the entire week you were with us on a ship the entire week. But nevertheless, we don't want to limit the case of Eidah Shatayach Azima only in such a case where the Eidim can testify that you were with us for this long period of time. Now, so therefore, that's the basic idea with Bedikas and Chakirais. Chakirais are to establish the exact time and place in order to render it an Eidush Atayach Lazima. And if you can't, then the Eidus is not acceptable. And now the Gemara relates it back to our Sugya at hand. If you say that a person makes such a large error, as we were suggesting before, then Chakir says a show Nami Eidush Atayach Lazima. Then even the Chakiras of what time of day it happened, it's also an Eidush Atayach Lazima. Because the Eidim can always say, well, we made a mistake. Meaning, if one Eid says it took place, if the Eidim said it took place, for instance, on the 5th hour, then Eidim Zaymim can say, Mazimim can rather come and say, how could you say that it took place on the 5th hour? On the 5th hour, you were with us, but while complaining elsewhere. They can always say that, yeah, but okay, but we made a mistake. We said the 5th hour, it really took place on the 4th hour, we made a mistake. The Gemara answers, we give them the full margin of error. When we say that the mazimim can make them Eidim Zaymim, we say, how can you say that this event took place in such an hour? You were with us at that hour. We give the full margin of error, meaning they have to say, how could it have taken place at this hour? Or any other hour which is close enough to the hour that you said, which is within the margin of error. They have to say that for the entire period of time. Now, let's assume if a person makes a mistake, 2 hours less a mashahu. They have to say, well, for the entire period of time, either 2 hours before, 2 hours less a mashahu before, or after you were with us. So you could not have testified. We give the entire margin of error, and we give that allowance to the Eidim who testified. Therefore, the Mazimim have to say, during the entire period of the margin of error, you were with us, and you could not have seen this event. So now the Gemara illustrates this in the Machlekes of Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda. Now, according to Rav Meir, so we had the case, one witness said that it occurred in the 2nd hour, the other witness said that it occurred in the 3rd hour. So we accept the Eidus, and it's called an Eidush Atayach Lazima. How is that? According to Rav Meir, we give the Eid who said the 2nd hour from the beginning of the day to the end of the 5th hour. We give them from the beginning of the day to the end of the 5th. How is that? The Eid that said the 2nd hour, so he may have meant the beginning of the 2nd hour. So you give him 2 hours. We say that a person makes a mistake of up to 2 hours. And therefore, we say, well, you give him 2 hours before the hour that he mentioned. 2 hours beforehand would have been from the beginning of the day, and 1 hour prior to that. Now, we'll see in a moment why we don't say that, but we say from the beginning of the day, therefore, the 1st hour. And now a 2nd hour could mean the end of the 2nd hour, which means you go 2 hours ahead, so that's the 3rd of the 4th hour. The other witness that said the 3rd hour, he may have meant the beginning of the 3rd hour, so therefore you give 2 hours prior, and therefore you start from the beginning of the day. So now you're starting from the beginning of the day, and now it could be the end of the third hour, which you give 2 hours forward, which is the fourth hour and the fifth hour. So therefore, the mazimim have to say, well, from the beginning of the day until the end of the fifth hour, that entire block of time, the entire margin of error, you were with us somewhere else. And only then they can make them into Eidim Zaymim. But we give that allowance of the full margin of error. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, so the case is 1/8 said the third hour, 1 said the, rather, the Gemara says, so Ramer, we're backing up to Romero, but didn't now really you should give him more than the beginning of the day, because of the aid that said the second hour, the aid that said the second hour, it could be the beginning of the second hour, you go 2 hours prior, so 2 hours earlier should be an hour before the day starts. You should even go more than that. But that's clear, you could not have made a mistake between nighttime and daytime. So therefore, there's no margin of error that it started prior, that it started before the day. But we give the full margin of error from the beginning of the day to the end of the fifth hour. Now, technically, it could be, you would have said that you give him even more, there should be a larger 6 hour margin of error, but between day and night, that's according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda, and according to Rabbi Yehuda. So 1/8 said it occurred on the third hour, the other 8 said it occurred on the fifth hour. We give from the beginning of the day to the end of the sixth hour. That is the margin of error. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we said a person makes a mistake up to 3 hours. So therefore, we give him from the beginning of the day to the end of the sixth. Now, he said it occurred on the 1/8 said on the third hour. It could be the beginning of the third hour. So you should give the first hour of the day and the second hour of the day. Now, there's a 3 hour potential discrepancy. Really, you should say it starts even from an hour before the day. And therefore, you should say, therefore, that we should even give him a discrepancy even an hour before the day. But a person doesn't make a mistake between day and night. So therefore, there's no reason to assume that he made that kind of mistake. He wouldn't have made that mistake, so we don't go before the day. But the Eidim have to say, the Eidim Hamazimim have to say, you could not have testified that this event occurred at this time and place because you were with us from the beginning of the day to the end of the sixth hour. Now, really, we should say, we should go ahead more than up to the end of the sixth hour, because the other aid said that it occurred on the fifth hour. That could be the end of the fifth hour. And if you go 2 hours ahead, then you have also the sixth hour, and you can go beyond. And you go to the seventh hour, and you go forward. And you should go 2 hours past the end of the sixth hour. But that type of mistake, it would not be acceptable, because people don't make mistake between where the sun is in the east and the west. Afternoon, the sun is in the different part of the horizon. So he wouldn't have made a mistake to that extent. So therefore, theoretically, according to Rabbi Yehuda, since a person makes a mistake 3 hours, we should really go from before the day to past noon. However, that mistake people don't make. So it's only within the zone of from the beginning of the day until noon, and we give them that full margin of error. So the Mazimim have to say, you could not have testified because you were with us during that entire block of time from the beginning of the day until the end of the sixth hour. Only then do we say that they're considered Eidim Zaymim. But nevertheless, they could still be considered made into Eidim Zaymim. They could be rendered into Eidim Zaymim, and therefore it is acceptable. But in Chanami, we do give the margin of error, and we do say that Eidim could make that type of mistake.